The wind was sharp, cutting through the high mountains like a knife. Snowflakes danced in the air, carried by the storm, and the ground was covered with ice. In the middle of this cold wilderness walked a small figure, a boy no older than 12. His clothes were worn, patched many times, and his shoes had holes in them. He had no family, no home, and no one waiting for him. He was an orphan, and the mountains were the only world he knew. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes carried a strange fire. He had survived hunger, cold, and loneliness. Every day was a fight. He searched for berries, roots, or sometimes a bird's egg to eat. At night he hid in caves, lighting small fires to keep away wild animals. Yet deep in his heart he carried a silent wish, for someone to care, for someone to notice him. But he never said it aloud. That morning, as he moved along a rocky path, he heard something unusual. At first he thought it was the cry of an animal. The sound was faint, carried by the wind. He stopped and listened. Again it came, a soft, broken voice, almost like a whisper. His heart beat faster. The mountains were dangerous. Sometimes raiders passed through and strange beasts prowled the cliffs. But this sound was different. It was not a growl or a scream. It sounded like pain. Curiosity pulled him forward. Slowly he followed the echo of the voice. Around a bend near a fallen tree covered in snow, he saw her. A figure lay on the ground, half buried in white. Her skin had a faint glow, pale silver under the sunlight, and her hair was long, falling like a river of blue silk. She was not human. Her ears were longer, her eyes larger, and her clothes strange, torn in many places. Blood stained the snow beside her. The boy froze. An alien. He had heard stories. Some said aliens were dangerous, some said they were kind. But no one really knew. For a long moment he stood still, unsure what to do. The girl opened her eyes. They shone like liquid gold, tired and filled with pain. She tried to move but could not. Her lips parted and a weak sound came out. "Water," she whispered. The boy's throat went dry. Fear battled with pity in his chest. He could walk away, leave her there, and no one would ever know. It would be safer. But as he looked at her lying helpless in the snow, something inside him stirred. He remembered how many times he had wished for help, wished for someone to notice him when he was weak and alone. Could he now ignore someone else's suffering? He stepped closer. His hands shook as he reached into the small leather pouch tied to his side. Inside was a tiny flask, almost empty, holding the last of his water. It was all he had left for the day. He stared at it, then at the girl. With a deep breath, he knelt beside her. Gently, he lifted her head and brought the flask to her lips. She drank slowly, each drop precious. Her breathing grew steadier, her golden eyes focusing on him. "You help me?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. The boy nodded silently. She tried to sit up, but pain struck her and she winced. Her side was bruised and there was a deep cut on her leg. The boy looked around nervously. If she was here injured, then something must have chased her. Maybe raiders, maybe beasts. The thought made his stomach twist, but he could not leave her. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and tied it around her wound. His fingers were clumsy, but he tried his best to stop the bleeding. She watched him, her expression softening. "Human," she whispered. "White or kind?" The boy did not answer. Words were hard for him. He only pulled her arm over his shoulder, trying to lift her up. She was taller than him, but light, almost weightless. Step by step, he dragged her towards a cave he had seen earlier in the cliffs. The snow crunched beneath their feet. The wind howled louder, as if warning them of something coming. Every shadow looked dangerous. Every sound made the boy's heart race. But he did not stop. Finally, they reached the cave. It was small, hidden between rocks, but enough for shelter. The boy set her down gently and quickly gathered sticks to make a fire. Soon flames flickered, warming the space. The alien girl lay beside the fire, breathing slowly. She studied him with her golden eyes full of questions. But before she could speak again, exhaustion pulled her into sleep. The boy sat quietly, staring at the flames. His hands were still shaking, his heart still racing. He had no idea who she was or what dangers would come because of her. All he knew was that he had helped. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Somewhere far away, hidden in the snowy mountains, echoes of horns rang in the cold air. But the boy did not hear them yet, for now, there was only the warmth of the fire, the silent cave, and the fragile bond between a lonely orphan boy and a wounded stranger. And in that fragile bond, something had already begun, something that would change both their lives forever. Morning light crept slowly into the cave. The fire had turned into ash and the cold air touched the boy's face. He opened his eyes and found the alien girl still asleep beside him. Her breathing was steady now, but her body looked weak, her wounds far from healed. For a long moment he just watched her. She was different from him, her silver skin, her golden eyes, her strange clothing. Yet when she had asked for water, she had sounded just like him, tired, afraid, and lonely. The boy rubbed his hands together for warmth. He knew one thing: the cave could not keep them safe for long. The mountains were full of eyes, and last night he had felt something watching. If raiders were hunting her, they would not stop. And if beasts smelled blood, they would follow. The girl stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked at the boy and whispered, "You stayed." He gave a small nod. Words were still hard for him, but his actions spoke louder. He picked up his small pack, then pointed toward the higher path of the mountains. "You want to cross?" she asked weakly. He nodded again. The girl tried to rise. Pain crossed her face, but she pushed herself up with his help. She leaned on his shoulder, and together they stepped outside into the blinding snow. The mountain stretched endlessly before them. White cliffs, sharp rocks, and a trail so narrow it looked like a thread. Every step was heavy. The boy was small, but his spirit was strong. He carried her weight as best as he could, guiding her step by step across the icy path. The wind roared, pushing against them. Loose stones rolled down into the deep valley below, reminding them how close death always walked here. For a while they moved in silence. Only the crunch of snow and the howl of the wind filled the air. Then the girl spoke softly. "My name is Soraya." The boy blinked. He had not expected her to share her name. He opened his mouth, and after a pause, he whispered back, "Arik." It had been months since he had spoken his own name aloud. Somehow saying it now felt strange, almost alive again. "Arik," Soraya repeated, her voice gentle. "You saved me." He looked away, his cheeks burning from more than the cold. He did not know what to say. They climbed higher, their bodies shaking from cold and hunger. At one point, Soraya slipped on the ice. Arik caught her just in time, pulling her close to his chest. She looked at him with surprise, her golden eyes meeting his dark ones. For a brief moment, there was no mountain, no storm, only two lost souls holding each other up. But the moment ended quickly. A sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. Then it grew louder, hoofbeats heavy and fast. Arik froze. His heart raced. He knew that sound. Raiders used beasts to move quickly across the snow. Soraya's face went pale. She gripped his arm. "They are coming!" Panic pressed against Arik's chest, but he forced his legs to move. He pulled her toward a narrow ridge that curved behind the rocks. They crouched low, trying to hide. The sound grew louder. From the corner of his eye, Arik saw shadows moving on the far side of the mountain. Figures in dark armor, riding massive creatures with tusks and claws, moved like hunters searching for prey. There were too many, 30 at least. Their banners snapped in the wind, marked with symbols Arik did not understand. Soraya closed her eyes. "They hunt me," she whispered. Arik looked at her, confused. "Why?" But before she could answer, the raiders passed, their voices echoing in a harsh language. The ground shook with every step of their beasts. Arik held his breath, keeping Soraya close. The cold bit into his skin, but he did not move. Not until the sound faded into the distance. When silence finally returned, Soraya's shoulders trembled. She leaned against him, whispering, "Thank you." Arik did not reply. He only knew one thing: they could not stop now. He stood, pulling her to her feet again, and together they continued across the mountain. The sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of red and gold. They reached a cliff where the land opened wide, showing endless peaks stretching like frozen waves. Soraya's eyes filled with both sadness and hope. "My people, they are somewhere beyond these mountains," she said softly, "but many are lost. Raiders came in the night, burning, killing. I escaped, but they follow me still." Arik listened, his chest heavy. He did not know her world or her tribe, but he understood the feeling of loss. He had lived with it every day since his parents were gone. In her words, he heard an echo of his own pain. As darkness returned, they found another small cave to rest in. Arik lit a tiny fire, and Soraya watched him carefully, her golden eyes reflecting the flames. "You are just a boy," she said. "Yet you carry me as if you have the strength of a warrior." Arik shrugged, his lips pressing into a thin line. He did not feel strong. He only felt tired. The wind outside screamed like a beast. Far away, horns blew again, faint but clear. The raiders were not gone. They were hunting, and the mountains would not hide the two strangers forever. Arik sat close to the fire, his eyes on the cave entrance. Soraya lay beside him, her breathing steady, but her body still weak. In the silence of the night, Arik's thoughts burned. He had made a choice when he gave her water. Now that choice was dragging him into a storm bigger than he could ever imagine. But there was no going back. The crossing had begun. The night was heavy. The cave walls pressed close around them, and the small fire cracked softly. Arik sat with his back against the stone, staring at the flames. His body ached from climbing, but his mind was sharper than ever. Every gust of wind outside made him tense. He knew the raiders were not far. Soraya lay nearby, her silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. She looked peaceful in her sleep, but her brow was still furrowed with pain. The bandage Arik had tied around her leg was already dark with blood. He wanted to find better cloth, herbs, or anything, but the mountains gave nothing easily. The cave was silent except for the fire, but after some time Arik thought he heard something else, a sound soft and strange as if the rocks themselves were whispering. He leaned forward, holding his breath. The sound came again, faint voices carried by the wind through cracks in the stone. He stood and crept toward the deeper part of the cave. It was narrow and dark, twisting like the throat of some giant beast. The whispers grew louder, echoing against the stone. He could not understand the words, but they chilled his skin. Then he saw them, two faint lights floating in the black. They looked like eyes. Arik stumbled back, his heart hammering. The firelight behind him seemed weaker now, swallowed by the shadows. Arik, Soraya's weak voice called. He turned quickly. She was awake, her golden eyes wide. She looked at him, then toward the darkness. "You hear it too?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded slowly. "These mountains, they are not empty. Spirits live here, old ones. My people speak of them." They whisper to warn, or to tempt. Arik swallowed hard. He had never believed in such things, but the cold in the cave felt alive, almost watching. The whispers grew louder, echoing like broken voices. Arik pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside his head now. "Leave her. Leave her. She brings death." The words made his chest tighten. He glanced at Soraya. She was trembling, but her gaze was fixed, determined. "They are trying to break you," she said, her voice sharp despite her weakness. "Do not listen, please." Arik's jaw tightened. He stepped back toward the fire, pulling Soraya closer to the warmth. The whispers hissed, angry, fading into the walls. Silence returned, but it was not the same. The cave felt heavier, darker. Arik sat down, his fists clenched. He had faced hunger, cold, and wild beasts before, but this was different. Soraya leaned against the wall, her breathing slow. After a long pause, she spoke again. "When I was young, my mother told me stories," she whispered. "She said these mountains were once rivers of light. My people crossed them long ago, seeking safety, but those who died here left their voices behind. Now they whisper forever." Arik listened, half afraid, half curious. Her words sounded like both truth and legend. "Why do the raiders want you?" he asked quietly. Soraya's eyes lowered. For a moment she did not answer. Then she whispered, "Because of what I carry." She lifted a small pendant from around her neck. It glowed faintly blue like a star caught in crystal. "This belonged to my tribe. It holds memory, history, power. The raiders want it to control my people. If they take it, everything will be lost." Arik stared at the pendant. He did not understand it fully, but he understood one thing. This was no ordinary girl. She carried something greater than herself, something that could decide the fate of many. The fire flickered, throwing shadows on the cave walls. For a moment, the whispering voices returned, softer this time. Arik thought he heard laughter, cruel and distant. Soraya clutched the pendant tightly. "We must leave at dawn," she said firmly. "If the raiders find us here, we will not escape." Arik nodded. He was only a boy, but in that moment he felt the weight of a warrior on his shoulders. He had chosen to help her. Now he was part of something bigger than survival. Hours passed slowly. The fire burned low and the cold crept closer. Arik fought to keep his eyes open, but sleep finally pulled him under. He dreamed of shadows, of voices calling his name, of 30 raiders marching through endless snow. He dreamed of standing alone against them, his small body shaking but his spirit unbroken. When he woke, the fire was nearly out. The cave was silent again, but the silence felt wrong, like something was waiting just outside. Soraya was awake too, her golden eyes watching the entrance. She whispered without looking at him, "They are close." Arik reached for his pack, his hands trembling. He felt the mountain's cold breath rush through the cave. The whispers returned one last time, crawling through the air. "Run, little human. Run before the storm breaks." Arik tightened his grip on his pack and looked at Soraya. His fear was real, but his choice was stronger. "We go," he said firmly. Together, they stepped into the frozen dawn, the fire dying behind them, the whispers fading into the dark stone. But outside, in the endless white, the storm was waiting, along with the hunters who would not stop until they found them. The mountains were still dark when Arik and Soraya moved again. The dawn was slow, the sky hidden behind heavy clouds. Wind cut across the ridges, carrying snow like knives. Arik walked ahead, holding Soraya's arm to keep her steady. Every step was a battle against the cold. For hours they climbed. The path twisted like a snake, narrow and dangerous. Below, the valley was filled with mist, and above, the peaks disappeared into gray skies. Arik's legs ached, but he did not stop. He knew the raiders were behind them. He could feel their presence like a shadow at his back. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, they had reached a high plateau. Rocks jutted out like teeth, and a frozen stream cut across the land. Arik helped Soraya sit near the stones to rest. She was pale, her breath shallow. "We cannot stop long," she whispered. Arik nodded, though he was glad for even a short rest. He bent down to fill his flask with icy water from the stream. As he dipped it, his ears caught a sound, low, deep, and guttural. It was not the wind. He froze. Slowly, he lifted his head. On the far side of the plateau, shadows moved. Four-legged shapes, large and lean, slipped between the rocks. Their eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light. Their bodies were covered in black fur, their shoulders rippling with muscle. Wolves, but not like any Arik had seen before. These were bigger, taller than a man, their jaws long, their teeth curved like blades, and their movements were not wild. They were controlled, almost trained. Arik's throat tightened. He hurried back to Soraya. She saw his face and knew at once. "They have found us," she whispered, her hand gripping the pendant at her neck. The wolves spread out, circling. Their growls rumbled like thunder rolling under the earth. Arik's heart raced. He had no sword, no bow, no shield, only stones and fire. But he remembered last night how he had scared beasts away before. He quickly grabbed dry twigs and scraps from his pack, his fingers shaking as he struck flint. Sparks flew. A small flame came alive, weak but real. The first wolf leapt. Arik swung a burning stick, shouting with all his strength. The flame flared and the wolf stopped midair, landing with a snarl. Its eyes narrowed, watching him carefully. Another wolf moved closer. Then another. Soon 5 of them stood in a half-circle, waiting, testing. Arik waved the fire again. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stay back!" Soraya pushed herself to her feet, though pain shot through her leg. Her golden eyes glowed faintly, catching the firelight. She whispered words in her own tongue, low and sharp, as if calling on something ancient. The wolves hesitated. For a moment, silence fell. Then one of them stepped forward. On its chest was a mark burned into its fur, a symbol sharp and cruel. Soraya's face hardened. "Raiders," she said softly. "These are not wild. They are sent." Arik's stomach twisted. The wolves were hunters controlled by those chasing them. This was no chance meeting. They had been released like arrows to kill. The largest wolf lunged. Arik threw a stone with all his strength. It struck the beast's eye, making it yelp in rage. The firestick swung again, bright in the air, forcing it back. But more wolves moved in. Their growls shook the ground. Arik's arms trembled. He could not fight them all. Then Soraya stepped forward. She raised the glowing pendant in her hand, and a burst of blue light flared out. The wolves stopped snarling, their ears flattening against their skulls. The light cut through the mist, sharp and pure. For a few heartbeats, the beast froze, afraid of the glow. "Now!" Soraya hissed. Arik grabbed her arm, and together they ran across the plateau. The wolves howled, the sound rising like thunder. Their claws scraped stone as they gave chase. Arik's lungs burned. His legs screamed, but he did not stop. He pulled Soraya with all his strength, forcing his body forward. Behind them, the howls grew louder, closer. The sound bounced across the cliffs, echoing through the mountains. At last, Arik saw a narrow crack in the rocks ahead. "There," he shouted. They dove inside just as the first wolf snapped at Arik's heel. Its teeth scraped stone, missing Their jaws clamped at the entrance, their growls shaking the rocks, but they could not enter. Arik collapsed against the wall, panting, his chest on fire. Soraya leaned on him, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "They will not stop," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "The raiders will send more. They know where we are now." Arik swallowed hard, his heart still pounding. He looked at the glow of her pendant, then at her face. He was only a boy, small and alone. But in that moment he knew. He had to fight, no matter how impossible it seemed. The wolves howled outside, their cries rising into the mountains. It was a warning, a signal. Somewhere beyond the peaks the raiders would hear. Arik clenched his fists. "Then we keep moving," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. The wolves snarled, but the boy and the alien girl pressed deeper into the crack, away from the jaws waiting outside, away from the safety of rest. The mountains had become a battlefield, and the unseen enemy was only the beginning. The crack in the rocks gave them only a short safety. Outside the wolves howled for hours, their cries sharp as knives. At last the sound faded into the distance, but Arik knew they had not given up. They were hunting, waiting for the right moment. By midday, the storm returned. Heavy snow fell, covering every path. The wind roared like a living thing, bending trees and shaking stones loose from the cliffs. Arik and Soraya pressed onward, their faces stung by frost. Every step forward felt like walking through knives. The trail grew narrow. A sheer drop yawned beside them, the valley so deep that even the snow disappeared into darkness. Soraya leaned heavily on Arik. Her wound bled again, staining the white ground behind them. "We must reach the ridge before night," she whispered, her voice weak. "If we stay in the open, the raiders will find us." Arik nodded, but his body shook with exhaustion. His legs burned, his lungs hurt, and his fingers were numb. Yet he kept going, pulling her along. The thought of stopping frightened him more than death. At last they reached a wall of stone. The path ended here, and only a steep cliff stretched upward. High above, the ridge continued, but the climb was deadly. Ice covered the rocks, and the wind tried to tear everything away. Arik stared at it, his heart sinking. He had climbed trees, small cliffs, but this was higher than any house, sharper than any blade. Soraya saw his fear. She placed her trembling hand on his shoulder. "I can try," she said. "But you must guide me." Arik swallowed hard. He tied his leather strap around her waist, looping the other end around himself. Then he tested the rocks with frozen fingers. One small step at a time, he began to climb. The wind howled, clawing at them. Snow stung their eyes. Arik's arms shook as he pulled himself up, helping Soraya behind him. She slipped once, her foot sliding off the ice. "Arik!" she cried. The boy's small hands burned with pain as he gripped the strap, holding her weight. His body dangled over the abyss, but he refused to let go. "Climb!" he shouted, his voice breaking. With trembling strength, Soraya found a hold and pulled herself back onto the rocks. Arik's chest heaved, his arms screaming in pain. But he kept moving inch by inch until they reached a narrow ledge halfway up. They stopped to breathe. Arik pressed his forehead to the cold stone, his eyes stinging with tears. He was only a boy, but he was carrying the weight of 2 lives. Soraya looked at him, her golden eyes soft. "You are stronger than you know," she whispered. Her words gave him a strange warmth. For the first time in years, someone believed in him, not as a poor orphan, not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. They climbed again. Hours passed like years. The storm grew wilder, tearing at their clothes. At last, Arik's numb fingers slipped. He fell a short distance before the strap caught him. Pain ripped through his shoulder, Soraya's face filled with fear. Without thinking, she reached down, gripping his wrist with both hands. "Hold on," she cried. He dangled over the abyss, the valley below yawning like the mouth of death. For a moment, his strength failed. He felt himself slipping. Then Soraya pulled with all her strength, her wound tearing, blood running down her leg. With a final cry, she dragged him back onto the ledge. They collapsed together, shivering, gasping, alive. The storm raged around them, but inside that moment, they both felt something deeper. They had saved each other. Twice now, Arik turned his head, his voice shaking. Why don't you leave me? I slow you down." Soraya shook her head fiercely. "No. You gave me water when no one else would. You carried me when I could not walk. I will not leave you. Ever." Her words sank into him like fire in the cold. For the first time in his life, Arik felt like he was not alone. At last, with the last of their strength, they pulled themselves onto the top ridge. The storm cleared just enough to reveal the land beyond, and there it was, the other side of the mountains. A wide valley stretched far, forests dark and endless, rivers frozen like silver lines. But before Arik could feel relief, a new sound reached them. Horns. Deep, echoing horns carried by the wind. Arik and Soraya turned. On the far ridges, dark figures appeared, raiders. Dozens of them, their banners snapping in the storm. The wolves had led them true. Soraya's face grew pale. They are here. Arik's fists clenched. He had survived hunger, beasts, storms, and cliffs. But now, 30 armed raiders waited below. The mountain had tested him, and he had survived. But the true battle was only beginning. The ridge was quiet after the storm. Snow lay heavy on the rocks, glittering faintly in the pale light of morning. Arik stood at the edge, breathing hard, his body sore from the climb. Beside him, Soraya leaned against the stone, her golden eyes staring into the wide valley below. For the first time in days, they could see far. The land stretched endlessly. Dark forests, frozen rivers, and distant hills bathed in silver mist. It almost looked peaceful, untouched. But peace was a lie. From the far ridges came the echo of horns, deep and cold. Arik's stomach tightened. The raiders were not far behind. Soraya gripped the pendant around her neck, her lips pressed thin. "They know we crossed," she whispered. "They will not stop until they find us." Arik nodded silently. He knew she was right. The wolves' howls had already betrayed their path. 30 riders would follow, relentless as the storm itself. Yet for a moment, standing on the ridge, Arik allowed himself a spark of hope. The mountains were behind them now. Ahead was new land, dangerous, yes, but free of cliffs and storms. If they could reach the forests, maybe, just maybe, they could vanish into the shadows. He turned to Soraya. Her face was pale, but her eyes glowed with quiet strength. She had lost much, yet she still stood. "Your people," Arik asked softly. "Are they here?" Soraya's gaze swept the valley. "Somewhere, scattered, hiding. When the raiders came, we ran. Families torn apart, children stolen, homes burned. I do not know who survived. But I must try to find them." Arik felt a strange weight in his chest. He understood loss, but her pain was heavier, wider, tied to more than one life. She carried her whole people's memory, pressed into that small, glowing pendant. "I will help you," he said simply. She looked at him, surprised. "Why, you owe me nothing." Arik's eyes hardened. "Because I know what it is to have nothing. No one should be alone." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. For a moment, the fear in her eyes softened. They rested only briefly. By midday, they began their descent into the valley. The snow thinned as they moved lower, the air a little warmer, though the ground was slick with ice. Every step was careful, slow, but Arik felt stronger now. The mountains had tested him, and he had not broken. As evening fell, they found shelter in a hollow tree near the forest's edge. Arik gathered wood for a fire, while Soraya tended to her wound as best she could. She closed her eyes, whispering words in her language, and the pendant glowed faintly, knitting the bleeding edges just enough to keep her standing. The fire burned low, its smoke curling into the night. Crickets clicked in the distance, and for the first time in days there was no storm, no howling beasts. It almost felt safe. But Arik could not sleep. His ears strained at every sound. He remembered the whispers in the cave, the wolves' eyes, the horns on the ridge. His body was tired, but his mind was sharp with fear. Soraya opened her eyes and watched him. "You do not rest," she said softly. Arik shook his head. "They are close. I can feel it." She reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Fear is natural, but do not let it break you. You are stronger than fear." Her words warmed him more than the fire. For a while they sat together in silence, listening to the night. Then it came, a distant thud. Then another. Heavy, steady like drums, Arik froze. His eyes darted toward the forest edge. The sound grew louder, closer. Soraya's face went pale. "Beast," she whispered. "Raiders ride them," Arik's heart pounded. He grabbed Soraya's arm and pulled her deeper into the hollow tree. The fire flickered low, the shadows swallowing them whole. Through the cracks of the wood, Arik saw them, shapes moving between the trees. Tall figures in dark armor, their beasts snorting clouds of steam in the cold. The ground shook with their steps. There were many. 30. Just as Soraya had said. Arik held his breath, every muscle tight. The raiders passed slowly, their voices deep and harsh. One beast sniffed the air, its tusks gleaming. For a moment, Arik thought it would turn toward the hollow. But then a horn sounded in the distance and the riders moved on. Their thunder. Arik let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling. Soraya leaned close, her whisper barely a breath. They hunt in circles. They will return. We cannot hide forever. Arik nodded. He knew the truth. The raiders were too many, too strong. But giving up was not in him. He stared into the dying fire, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. Then we run, he said. We run until there is nowhere left to run. Outside, the forest grew darker, the air heavy with the scent of beasts. The dawn had given hope, but night had brought fear back stronger, and soon fear would become war. The night bled slowly into dawn. A pale light spread across the valley, turning the frost into silver fire. Arik stood at the edge of the forest, his body trembling from cold and fear, but his eyes sharp. Beside him, Soraya held her pendant close, its faint blue glow fighting against the shadows. They had run all night. Through snow, through trees, through rivers frozen hard as stone. Their bodies were near breaking, but still they moved because stopping meant death. And now the sound came again. Horns, deep and heavy, shaking the trees. Then came the thunder of hooves and claws. The forest stirred with the arrival of 30 riders. Arik's chest tightened as the raiders appeared through the mist. They were tall, armored in black iron, their faces hidden behind cruel masks. Each one rode a beast larger than a horse, muscles like stone, tusks curling upward, eyes burning with red fire. The ground shook as they spread across the valley, forming a wall of death. Soraya's grip on the pendant tightened, her golden eyes burned with both fear and fury. They have found us, she whispered. Arik swallowed hard. His fists clenched, though he carried no sword. He was just a boy, an orphan with nothing but courage. Yet standing before 30 raiders, he felt no thought of running. Not now. The leader of the raiders rode forward. His armor gleamed darkly, and on his chest burned the same cruel mark Arik had seen on the wolves. He raised a black spear, his voice booming. "Give us the girl," he roared. "Give us the stone she carries, and your death will be quick." Soraya flinched, but Arik stepped in front of her. His heart hammered, but his voice came out steady. "No." The raiders laughed, their voices like metal grinding. The leader sneered. "A child defies us?" Arik's knees shook, but he held his ground. "She is not yours. You will not take her." The leader raised his hand. At once, the raiders lowered their spears. 30 beasts roared together, their cries shaking the earth. The forest birds scattered in fear. Soraya touched Arik's arm. "You cannot fight them," she whispered. "There are too many." Arik's eyes flicked to her, fierce. "I won't let them take you." The raiders charged. The ground split with thunder as 30 beasts rushed forward. Arik grabbed Soraya's hand and pulled her back into the trees. Branches cracked, snow burst into the air, the sound of iron and fury behind them. Arik's lungs burned. His legs felt like fire. But he did not stop. He pulled her through the forest, weaving between trees, ducking under branches, leaping over roots. Yet the raiders were faster. A beast crashed through the trees to their left, tusks gouging bark. Arik yanked Soraya away just in time. Another rider swung a spear, the blade cutting through the air where Arik's head had been. They were being surrounded. At last, they stumbled into a clearing. No more trees, no more cover. Only open ground and 30 raiders closing in. Arik and Soraya stopped. His chest rose and fell like drums, his body near collapse. Soraya stood beside him, her pendant glowing brighter now, pulsing like a heart of light. The raiders circled them, beasts snarling, spears gleaming. The leader rode forward again, his mask glinting in the dawn. "Last chance," he growled. "Give her to us, boy. Give us the stone, or you will watch her die." Arik's throat felt dry. He was small, unarmed, and hopelessly outnumbered. Yet something inside him refused to break. He remembered the cave whispers telling him to leave her. He remembered the wolves, the storm, the cliff. Every time he had chosen to hold on. And now, with death staring at him, his choice was the same. He stepped forward, his body between Soraya and the raiders. His voice cracked but carried across the clearing. "You want her? You will have to kill me first." The raiders roared with laughter, mocking him. But Soraya looked at him with something different, something fierce and shining. Her pendant blazed suddenly, flooding the clearing with blue light. The raiders hissed, their beasts stamping in fear. The leader raised his spear, shouting for them to press on, but the light grew brighter, burning like a second sun. It was not only light, it was memory, power, The voice of her people carried through crystal. A song filled the valley, ancient and haunting, echoing through every tree and stone. The raiders faltered. The beast snarled and stepped back, eyes wild. Even the leader's mask seemed to shake under the glow. Arik shielded his eyes, but his heart surged with hope. The light was not just Soraya's, it felt like it poured through both of them, as if his courage had unlocked its strength. The forest shook. The dawn blazed brighter, and then silence. The raiders stared at them, 30 strong, weapons raised but unsteady. The leader growled, his voice low with rage. "This is not the end, boy. We will take her. And we will take you too." He raised his spear, and the 30 raiders roared again. Arik tightened his fists. Soraya's glow wrapped around them both like a shield. The battle had not yet begun. But the storm was here, and an orphan boy now stood